I guess I wanted to talk a little bit about Zen Master Soeng Hyang in the early days for a little while. It's been a kind of an anniversary of him coming to New England 50 years ago, almost 51 years ago now. And I think I met him after he'd been here for 4 or 5 months, been in Providence for 4 or 5 months. And I was just very lucky. It was very amazing that I happened to see the Zen Center sign and outside the apartment. I was looking for an apartment and I saw this little wooden sign that said Zen Center. And it took me some time to get enough nerve to go in there. I had read all these books that the teacher would hit you or something and shout cots at you. And so I felt pretty intimidated to actually go into the Zen Center. And I just had read a lot of whatever was out there at that time about Zen, and especially Philip Kapleau's book, The Three Pillars of Zen, was pretty scary, I thought. So anyway, when I finally did knock on the door, excuse me, and come in there, Zen Master Soeng Hyang was on the floor doing calligraphy, and he had a white T-shirt on and his gray monk's pants. And I didn't recognize him as probably being the teacher. He looked quite ordinary down there on the floor with his T-shirt on. And he hardly, when I came in, I don't think he looked up. Jacob Pearl, Wubong Sanim, he's the one that opened the door and showed me around. So as I was leaving, I was there probably only 10 or 15 minutes. And as I was leaving, Zen Master Soeng Hyang stood up and walked me to the door and said, in his very broken English, "We have Dharma talk Sunday. You come, okay? You come." It was like so. I was impressed with his urgency for me to come back. I was kind of, I don't know. I felt like it seemed really important to him that I come back. Maybe not so important to me at the time, but I thought he really wants me to come back. And so I did. And I continued to go back there with these wonderful Dharma talks that were translated for him. It's at the time he spoke fluent Japanese. So it was a Japanese Buddhist professor from Brown University who spoke fluent Japanese. He was American, but he spoke fluent Japanese. So Sansani would talk in Japanese, and this professor would translate it into English. And pretty quickly, Sansani, he wasn't happy with the translations. And he'd hit the guy on the knee and say, too long. The Sansani would just say a few words, and then this guy would go on and on. And so we weren't getting the genuine article until he started to just speak to us plainly, very simply in his own broken English. But again, what kept me going there was his enthusiasm. The same thing about you come. And then he's kept saying, only go straight, don't know. Only go straight, don't know. And I didn't even know what don't know meant. But the way he said it, it was like, well, that sounds important. Only go straight, don't know. And I literally asked him once, because I didn't have any, I just was I went to a 3-year diploma program. I didn't go to college. I hadn't read anything about Buddhism. And I just didn't know much at all. As far as, I don't know. I said to him, if you only go straight, don't know, wouldn't you run into something? I really thought, like there was a pillar in the Dharma room. I said, you go, don't know, you might walk right into the pillar. So I said how much I didn't understand the concept of what he was even saying. It's just that he was saying it so enthusiastically that I kept coming back. And then he began to explain what don't know meant. And it meant no preconceived idea, before thinking, just see, just hear, just taste. And so that was really great to begin to get a little bit about what that meant. So I think what is so important for all of us is to think about, remember what brought us to the Zen Center, what brought us to practice. It doesn't have to be the quantum technique that you're listening to right now, but what brought you to the Dharma? What brought you to a Dharma center? What attracted you to Buddhism? And for me, the very first thing was when Buddha said, I read that he said, everybody already has it, and that it and dust penetrates. So you have it, and it interpenetrates with dust. And I just thought that was so brilliant. And that's why I kept reading all those Zen books, because I didn't even know that the Buddha taught that until I read it in a book. And I went, wow, isn't that something? That everybody already has it, because I was raised as a Christian and very, I left when I was around 16, stopped going to church because I didn't like that only through Jesus can you enter the gates of heaven. I didn't like that at all. I just felt it didn't make any sense to me. Even heaven didn't make any sense to me. But only through this one teacher can you enter the gates of heaven. It was just, so when I started to learn a little bit about everybody already has it, I was like, wow, nobody was excluded. And so that simplicity of just looking for something that you can kind of trust, and knowing yourself and why you even look in the first place. Like, remember that mind, even when you were 5, maybe, or 6, where you just aren't quite sure what's going on. A lot of things are very confusing. Sometimes they're very hurtful. And you just start to go, well, what is going on? And so that metaphysical question of how did I get here? And when I die, where do I go? Some of us had that when we were 6. I certainly did. I was really kind of befuddled with how I landed in the family I was in, and where was I going to go when I died? A couple of times I was very ill and had very high fevers, and had some amazing nightmares. And during the high fevers, where one nightmare I had, I was floating in space, and I was just I was young. I was maybe 11 or something, and I was floating in space, and I was totally isolated. And, I was just going to be in this void for the rest of my life, this void. Nobody would see me. I wouldn't see anyone. And I was nothing. But I still had all my ego. I was like totally feeling lonely and lost and isolated, and like the worst thing in the world, to feel isolated. And so those kinds of fears or impressions of death, maybe for me, really kept the question about what's going on here. And, it's amazing. When I was growing up, I was born in 1948. And when I was growing up, a lot of stuff to me was very phony. We ate out of cans a lot, and the food was phony. And I didn't know any better. But I remember when I was a sophomore in high school, John Kennedy was killed. And my English teacher, who I really liked, he just put his head on the desk and started wailing. And he wasn't the kind to do that. He wasn't like this emotional guy, all this. He was a really good teacher, but I had never seen a man cry before. I didn't even know a man could cry. And it was so spontaneously connected to correct relationship function situation. It was extremely upsetting. And he just started crying. And it was like, it just woke me up on some level. I went, wow, he heard something, he felt something, and he cried. And it's not something that I would see in my everyday life. So it's these things that you experience as you're growing up that really strike you, that like, what is genuine? What is really happening? And what honestly, so that when that song, Bob Dylan's song, something's happening and you don't know what is, do you, Mrs. Jones, Mr. Jones, whatever it was, it's like, that really hit me. And that was kind of around the same time period. I don't know what's going on. So when I went to the Zen Center and met Zen Master Soeng Hyang and heard about don't know, the one thing I knew was that he really meant it. that he really was very enthusiastic about it. And then when he started to teach me primary point in the interview room, just don't know. And so you hit, and then you genuinely don't let a thought come up. You can do it if you practice it a little bit, you know, and you're just there in that moment, in that moment, in that moment. And that he was like, the first time I hit the floor, oh, very good. You know, it was like, a lot of it's a show, you know, he's just trying to get me to, to encourage me. But it worked. It worked. So every time I hit, oh, very good, you know. And he wouldn't ask me that was all I had needed to know was primary point for many interviews. And I felt like I was doing pretty good because he kept telling me very good. But I did get that the hit felt good, you know, and I kind of started to do it at work. Like if something got, I was working full time and very, very busy job. At that time, I was I was in a skilled nursing home with 50 beds on my unit, and I was the head nurse. I'm only like 25 years old, you know, and I'm the head nurse of this 50-bed unit. And I did all the all the wound care, and, you know, I had to manage the medications and call the doctors and everything. So it was a lot of responsibility. And I just remember just using the primary point when I started to get uptight. I just like internally and I settle down and go back. And it was just a very good early lesson, just the primary point, not anything fancier than that. So I'm going to tell this story about a beginner that you all probably already know, but it's in Dropping Ashes on the Buddha, and it's about the Buddha is grass shoes. It's one of those 100 titles, and it's a story about a monk that entered the monastery, and he was kind of not real bright, and well, I think he had a learning disability, and I'm not going to say he wasn't bright, but he was very bright. But he had a hard time learning. And so when he would listen to the Dharma talks, it would just do nothing but confuse him. He just felt like he couldn't grasp anything the teacher was saying. And then he would try to meditate, and he had no concentration. He just couldn't stand sitting still. And he couldn't stop wiggling. Meditation was just beyond him. And so that was awful. He couldn't memorize the chants. He was maybe tone deaf as well. And so had a very hard time with the chanting. So he got permission from the head Dharma teacher in the temple to work in the kitchen. So he was a monk. He became a monk. He was a monk, but he all he did was work in the kitchen. And that's where he was super comfortable. He was very good at it. He would do anything. You know, he was kind of like not even a sous chef. Maybe he wasn't skillful enough to be a sous chef, but he cleaned the floors, he'd wash the pots, he'd gather the firewood for the stove. And that's what he was good at, all these simple tasks. And so after he'd been at the monastery for quite a while, I can't remember in the story how long it says he'd been there, but at least 5-7 years or whatever. The head Dharma teacher said to him, and they called him Sokdu, which meant rockhead. He got the name Sokdu as a nickname, I guess. They called him Rockhead. Just as kind of an endearing thing, but he was like he had no brain. So that's what they joke with him. And so, but he was happy there. And so after he'd been there for all that time, the head Dharma teacher said, you ought to at least once meet the Zen master and ask him a question. You've been here a long time. And so he said, oh, I'd have no idea what to ask him. What would I ask him? He had no thought in his head like, what? Well, I'll go meet him. I'll do what you tell me to do, but I wouldn't know what to ask him. And so he said, well, just ask him what is Buddha. That's like a basic. Ask him what is Buddha. So he went in, he kept going, what is Buddha? What is Buddha? So he memorized what to ask the Zen master. And so he went in there and bowed to the teacher, and he asked the teacher, what is Buddha? And the teacher said, Buddha is mind. But the name Shin, I think, means mind in Korean, but he thought he said Shim, which means grass shoes. So he thought that the teacher said Buddha is grass shoes rather than Buddha is mind. And he goes, oh, thank you for your teaching. Buddha is grass shoes. He didn't say it out loud, but he took it in like, oh, okay, Buddha is grass shoes. And so it made no sense to him like other teachings. So he just went out and, one day but it became his Kungang. He had learned he already had a great question. He wouldn't have been at the monastery if he hadn't had a great question, but that kind of embedded in him. Buddha is grass shoes. What does that mean? So he had the question, what does that mean? And that's the first time really he'd really kind of pinpointed his practice into not only doing the manual labor and loving the monastery, but also he had this pinpointed, now, what does that mean, Buddha is grass shoes? So it's not so much what the koan says, it's what the koan brings you to, which is, what does that mean? So he was doing that, and very diligently. And one day he was bringing home a pile of wood down the hill back to the kitchen. And he tripped on a rock, and everything went flying, including his grass shoes. He tumbled, and his shoes fell off his feet. And one of the shoes hit him in the head. And that he went, oh, that's what it means. Buddha is grass shoes. He had this opening. He had a huge Kensho experience, this big opening. And he was just so happy. And he immediately ran to the Zen master, holding his shoe. And he said, now I understand. Buddha is grass shoes. And the teacher could just see how opened he was, And he hit the teacher on the head with the grass shoes or something. And the teacher just totally validated his practice, totally. It was wonderful. He was open, and he got enlightenment. So I love that story because I love koan practice. And I love the fact that the koan, it didn't matter what it was, even if he had misinterpreted it, but he had that, what is this? What does that mean? And that's what we do at the Quantum School. We teach and we really encourage, just as we had said when we introduced meditation, what is this? And that's something that, I'm going to tell another story, because this, what is this, is followed by not knowing. And that's that don't know mind. But it's like we often will, I don't know, it seems like people often get a little bit stuck on the question rather than just going right into the not knowing. It's okay that you don't know. It's like, what do you have when you don't know? What's in front of you just now? So I'm going to tell the other story, and they go together. This other story is in the back of the Compass of Zen. And I only know it vaguely, so it's not gonna be verbatim, but it's about this Zen master who lived up in a mountain. He's very diligently practicing, very, very, he's depicted as a very wonderful, clear-minded Zen master. And he lived alone up there and kept a nice, clean temple and helped his community, and simple life, very strong practice. He'd go down once a week and have a meal with the village and give a Dharma talk and answer questions and be served. And they started giving him this wonderful wine that they made down there. He didn't drink, but he didn't, he was just eating their food. And so he took a little wine, and he enjoyed it. He enjoyed the wine, so every week when he went down, he'd have some wine. And he wouldn't drink all week long, and he wasn't craving it, but he enjoyed it while he had it. And so one day he was coming up the mountain after the meal and the wine, the Dharma talk, and he was just walking along back up and he always stopped at this graveyard on the way up, like halfway up the mountain, there's a graveyard. And he always would stop and give everybody a blessing and do a little chanting right there. So one night he's still kind of tipsy, and he did his chanting, he did his blessing, and all of a sudden this big demon comes out of this grave, huge being, and very demonic, very nasty, actually. And he's, hovering over the Zen master and saying, "You're nothing but a phony. You're just this horrible, phony teacher, and you don't deserve to live. I'm going to kill you." And the teacher, the Zen master didn't get upset at all. He's just looking at him and said, "Oh, well, please, what is it? What's going on? Why are you so angry?" And he said, I see you drinking with those villagers, and you're breaking the precepts and blah, blah, blah. So, but the Zen master was very calm, and the demon noticed that. He goes, "I'm not even scaring this guy." And so he kind of was impressed with how, even though he was so big and so threatening, that the Zen master kept this strong, steady center. He was just asking him questions, so the Zen master said, "Well, rather than killing me, why don't we first have a little contest? Why don't we just first we can check each other's minds, and then you can kill me." And the demon said, "You can't lord it over me." And he said, "Well, just let's give me a task, see if I can do it." And so the demon said, "Okay, you have to hide from me, and I'm going to look for you. I'll give you 3 chances to avoid me and get out of, so I can't find you. And if you can't do it, then I'll kill you." And the teacher said, the Zen master said, fine, no problem. And he said, "But if you can't find me, then you have to become my student." And then the demon said, "Yeah, that won't happen. But if I do find you, I'm going to kill you." And that was their agreement. So the demon was told, it's like hide and seek. So he closed his eyes and gave them a certain amount of time, not too much time. He gave them a little bit of time to hide. And so the first time the Zen master had a lot of special powers, by the way. So from all those years of deep practice up in the mountain. So this is just a story. So the first time the Zen master went to like this high temple in their own, I guess it was in Korea, high temple up in the mountains. It's this very remote little place. And he skirted across the Dharma room, and he sat on a cushion, and he went into a deep samadhi, like breathing out mu. He breathed out and went into a very deep samadhi. Instantly, he was able to do that. And so within seconds, the demon came to him and caught him and said, that's such low-class practice. I could find you immediately. And samadhi's no good. Anybody could do that. And so then the teacher said, "Okay, well, I've got 2 more chances." And so the demon closed his eyes and let him go off. And so this time the Zen master went into the highest peaks of the Himalayas and found a cave, and he turned himself into a snow leopard and went into the deepest part of inside the cave, the deepest part of the mountains and deepest part of the cave, and disguised as a tiger. And immediately again, the demon found him. So this demon was quite something. And So the Zen master says, "Well, I have 1 more chance." And so the demon closed his eyes, and all the Zen master did was go outside the cave and just went about 10 feet away, and he sat down. And of course, what do you think he did? He breathed out, "Don't know." He just completely entered the moment. Just this moment. And the demon couldn't find him. He looked everywhere. All over the world, couldn't find him. So finally, the Zen master kind of just became himself. And then the demon came to him and said, how did you do that?" And he said, "Well, you'll have to become my student and I'll teach you." So that's the don't know story. And, I remember when we were still in that first Zen Center we lived the first 2 years of the Zen Center, Sansanim was giving a Dharma talk, and he was talking about samadhi, because we had read mostly Japanese Zen books. That's all that was out, actually. And so people were asking him about samadhi, and he explained it so well, about how, you have this idea of hara. It's this, like, in the Japanese, and this particular Japanese tradition, that a lot of Rinzai type teachers would talk about, centering your energy and your hara, and then breathing back into the hara, and then the exhalation of mu. And I had been taught that technique as well before I met Sansanim, and breathing out mu. And it was just so beautiful. I was really, it's kind of like my English teacher putting his head on the desk and starting to cry. The way Sansanim taught about the difference between samadhi and don't know just really struck me. I was so hungry to have something genuine, something that I really could trust. And that's why I like that demon story in the Compass of Zen, because you have samadhi, but there's still, for what and for whom? How is that servicing anyone? You're in samadhi, but what about everybody else? And this thing about only don't know, and how, we follow that with, when you do only don't know, you have your compassion arises, and you have this bodhisattva consciousness. And that's something that all of us probably have already experienced, of just being able to do some meditation and feeling more altruistic. Just last weekend, I went down to LA to the Dharma Zen Center, and I had to give quite a few interviews, but I still had some sitting periods that I was able to sit. And it was only a day and a half. It ended at noon on Sunday, and it started Saturday morning. So it was a short retreat. I came home Sunday, and I noticed Monday that I felt terrific. I just felt very relaxed. And I said to Mary, my partner Mary, I said, I feel really good. And I said, it was just a short little retreat, and it really helped me. And I was busy a lot of but I think even though I'm busy at the retreat, I'm talking about the Dharma. I'm encouraging people to practice, and I think that really gives me a lot of energy as well, actually. But I just felt so calm, and I know it's because I had to fly down there, fly back. It's raining, everything's late, and it wasn't the smoothest trip. Both of them were bumpy, but still, it was like that little time that I was at this retreat helped me so much. So of course we're about to have a retreat at Empty Gate, and I really encourage you to do some of it, do parts of it, or all of it if you can. Because it's like, that saying, the proof is in the pudding, and it's true. I mean, you can hear these talks, or you can, like a story or whatever, and yet if you don't do it, you don't understand, you don't get it, and I don't think I've ever walked away from a retreat and not felt better the next day. I know I never have. I remember from the very beginning, when we started out in Providence with Zen Master Soeng Hyang, we every Saturday night we'd sit from 7:30 to 9:30, and I hated it. I just felt, I have a little ADD stuff going on, and I just felt like I was in a pressure cooker, and I did it because I had to. We had guests, and I was one of the teachers already. I mean, he made us a teacher so fast. And so I'm like, I've got, I got the robes and stuff, but I had to be a good example. So I'd go to the sittings and I'd stay for the whole thing. But it was gruesome for me. I just can't, because of my personality type or whatever. It was just horrible. But I mean, not I wouldn't say horrible, but difficult, very difficult for me. And yet I always felt better on Sunday after we did this long sitting on Saturday night. And I had to admit that to myself. I went, this Even though you'd think you're getting nothing out of it, it's like amazing to just to have yourself gazing at that floor, coming back to don't know.